The 2024 Summer Olympic Games are just a few months away. Some of the best athletes in the world will gather in Paris, France at the end of July for a couple of weeks of competition. It is exciting to watch. Here's what this means in our house. Andy and Abby love swimming, and they love to see some of the top swimmers in the world gather for this elite time of competition. I think about Audrey Bethea, who had a great outing in her recent district track meet, that she'll be looking forward to track and field events that are a centerpiece part of the Summer Olympics. In fact, it's one event about that track and field that I want to talk about to lead us into our lesson tonight, and it's the relay race. The relay race, some of the coaches that are best coaches in the country will tell us that the relays are won or lost, often based on the exchange of the baton. You have one runner reaching out to receive the baton from the one who has been running the most recent leg of the race. A good exchange of the baton can make all the difference in winning or losing. That is why some of the great coaches and outstanding teams spend a lot of time in practice passing the baton. Passing, handing off the baton. For all of the individual efforts in track and field, when you're running around the track, that is your individual talent, but it is truly a team effort to pass the baton and to do it in such a way that it helps your teammate move toward the victory. Good exchange can make all the difference in the race. Over this past week, we have been reading in our daily Bible study about King David, various aspects of his reign. We also have seen and have experienced some of the discussion ceremonies that deal with the passing of the baton from one king to the next, from David to Solomon. And it is that idea, the passing of the baton of leadership, that gets our attention tonight. I want us to spend a good bit of our time in our Bible study looking at that. If you'll remember with the whole failed coup attempt of Absalom, after that disaster, I think David did a really good job of trying to bring together leaders in the country and to do it in such a way that had a good, smooth transition of power. We're going to look at a snapshot of that in 1 Chronicles chapter 28. Tonight we'll only look at the first 10 verses, but there are a lot of verses surrounding that deal again with this passing of the baton of power. What we want to look at is David's preparation and then the specific message that he had for his son Solomon. So let's get straight to our study. We're going to go to the first 7 verses of 1 Chronicles chapter 28. David summoned all the officials of Israel to assemble at Jerusalem. The officers over the tribes, the commanders of the divisions in the service of the king, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, and the officials in charge of all the property and livestock belonging to the king and his sons, together with the palace officials, the warriors, and all the brave fighting men. King David rose to his feet and said, "Listen to me, my fellow Israelites, my people. I had it in my heart to build a house as a palace of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord, for the footstool of our God, and I made plans to build it. But God said to me, you are not to build a house for my name, because you are a warrior and have shed blood. Yet the Lord, the God of Israel, chose me from my whole family to be king over Israel forever. He chose Judah as leader, and from the tribe of Judah He chose my family. From my father's sons He was pleased to make me king over all Israel. Of all my sons, and the Lord has given me many, He has chosen my son Solomon to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. He said to me, Solomon your son is the one who will build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. I will establish his kingdom forever if he is unswerving in carrying out my commands and laws, as is being done at this time. 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verses 1 through 7. David had a pretty good crowd there, didn't he? You can tell that this was some of the great leaders of the country. Had leaders from the 12 tribes. Had military leaders, elite soldiers, and then a phrase that I would only refer to as cabinet members that were in charge of various aspects of the palace and of the kingdom. But he brought all of these leaders together so that there could be a smooth transition of power as he talked about before them the importance of having this smooth transition of leadership. One from a tribe of Judah had been chosen as leader. And from all the families, his family was chosen. From all of his brothers, David said, I was chosen. And it's been a joy, it's been a pleasure to serve, and now it's time to pass along this baton to Solomon. And each time he's referring to the plans of God as he puts that message before the Israelites. But he said, there's something that's been on my heart. He said it was something, and we know this. We know from fact that when we go back to the very beginning of David's reign, David made this comment. He said, here I am. I'm living in a house of cedar while the ark of God remains in a tent. The tabernacle, from way back then, it was the tent that had been used where it would be set up, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant, along with the furnishings, would be placed. We know that this was a plan that God had in place so that He could be there. Now, David saw this. He's living in this nice palace. The Ark is in this tent, and he has it on his heart to build a permanent home for the Ark and for the Lord to dwell with the people. Nathan the prophet is part of this conversation. And that night, the Lord told Nathan, go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelled in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. I have been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. Whenever I have moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of their rulers whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, why have you not built me a house of cedar? So even up to that point, God told David, you've been a warrior, you've shed blood, and I don't think that you should be the one to build this. It's an interesting concept. Well, you talk about one that can bring about some controversy, get some people together that are scholars about, was this even a plan? This wasn't God's idea. This was David's idea. Did God allow it? Did He bless it? I do know this, that God's presence, the glory of the Lord, filled the temple after it was built. So obviously there was approval that was given to it, or I don't think God would have dwelled among the people there. So that's important, but that is a pretty big discussion, just so you'll know that. All right, let's get back. We see where David has talked about all of these things that he wanted to do. Now, what David did do is just because he couldn't build it, he put plans together using a lot from Exodus 25, from that area of the law, of the furnishings and things. He also gathered a lot of the resources that would be used. Interesting. He did a lot. He did a lot except put the pieces together to build the temple. That would be Solomon's responsibility. There would still be a lot of work left to do. All right, let's get to the message that David had for Solomon. This goes to 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 8. He says, so now I charge you in the sight of all Israel and of the assembly of the Lord and in the hearing of our God, be faithful to follow all the commands of the Lord your God, that you may possess this good land and pass it on as an inheritance to your descendants forever. And you, my son Solomon, acknowledge the God of your father and serve Him with wholehearted devotion and with a willing mind. For the Lord searches every heart and understands every desire and every thought. If you seek Him, He will be found by you. But if you forsake Him, He will reject you forever. Consider now, for the Lord has chosen you to build a house as a sanctuary. Be strong and do the work. Be strong and do the work. So before this large gathering, David challenged Solomon to follow the Lord. This sounds a lot like the message, if you'll remember, that Moses had for Joshua. If you'll remember back in Deuteronomy, I believe it's around chapter 31, where Moses spoke to Joshua and said, be strong and courageous. Then if you go over to Joshua chapter 1, the Lord speaking to Joshua, be strong and courageous. The leaders of Israel are talking to Joshua at the end of chapter 1. Be strong and courageous. It was a consistent message throughout this transition of power from Moses to Joshua. So when we look at the transition of power from David to Solomon, right, is there a key message here? I think so. I think it's follow the Lord. He said in verse 8, follow the commands. Verse 9, follow the commands of the Lord with wholehearted devotion. And then in verse 10, follow the commands. Follow the commands. Important message. I want us to get practical here, and here's why I want to. I believe that this transition of power, I mentioned Moses and Joshua very intentionally. The transition of power from Moses to Joshua, then from David to Solomon. Those are two examples of a great transition of leadership in the Old Testament. And I thought about it. In all fairness, we don't see a lot of that good transition of power, do we? A lot of what we see when we look at transition of power from one generation to the next is we may find one good king. Sometimes they were hard to come by, right? Might find one good king, but he would be sandwiched in between a number of bad kings, kings that did not follow the Lord. But there's something different about Moses and Joshua, David and Solomon. And it makes me wonder why that this was something that didn't continue, why this was not something that could have blessed this country for years to come. But I read Moses to Joshua, good leader, but there was no leader that followed Joshua. Was that intentional? Was that the Lord's plan? Or was that a failure on Joshua's part to not train a leader to follow in his steps? That's just an interesting question. When we think about David to Solomon, strong leader, but apparently Solomon, well, we know that the end of his reign is not going to go very well. Did he not train a good leader to follow him? We'll notice that transition of power when we get to that part of our Bible study. But I think we've got to notice this. Now, the New Testament does a lot better. You have Jesus spending time with the 12. You have Jesus spending time specifically with Peter, James, and John. You have Paul spending time with young preachers like Timothy and Titus. So we have a number of examples like that. In fact, here's a great thing. Paul will refer at one point to 4 generations of leaders. He says, and the things that you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. 4 generations of leaders. And Paul says it's important that one generation teaches the next. Now, here's the specific application for us at Mall Road. As I look at our church family, and if we look and divide up ages by decades, we have children that are in the newborn to age 10 category. But then we have teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. We have, if I added that right, that's 10 different decades of members that are represented here. We have the makings for this great thing to take place, of where the older teaches the younger, of where one generation trains the next. I have to tell you this. This is so important to me because I look at the church and I see a lot of our young people wanting to step up, and I'm seeing them want to do a good job. But y'all, I hear us, okay? I hear us. And I'm telling you what we need to be doing more of. We need to be doing more of lifting them up. Do more of lifting them up rather than saying, could have talked a little louder. Boy, you had a hard time starting the second verse of that song, didn't you? If we want there to be leaders in the church tomorrow, we take this young group and we grow them. If they're having a problem in learning something, we need to teach them. I do, you do, we do. We need to teach them. Now, and this is something that can happen at church and it can happen at home. Do you notice Moses to Joshua? That was not necessarily a family relationship, was it? Now, David and Solomon was. That's the father training his son. We'll see how well he did. But this can happen as a member of the church that I recognize that there's a young man. By the way, this can happen with ladies too. When we start talking about teaching classes and so many other areas of service, we've got opportunity for the older to teach the younger. We need to be about that, older teaching the younger. Every time I look and I see someone serving in the church and they come up to do something and they're working alone. And I'm like, why are we working alone? Why are we not bringing someone along with us? And then I look at the times that I'm struggling, whether it is in technology, whether it's getting our video lessons ready and things like that. And I'm like, who would take care of this if I weren't able to be here? Because I've asked for help. I'm trying to get people to come along. And what we need is a volunteer spirit. Some of our younger ones that have a desire, maybe some of our older ones that already have knowledge that I don't even know about. Man, we've got opportunity to work with one another. We've got opportunity to work with one another. This is the way it's supposed to work. Now, I want to do something tonight. I don't typically do this. But I want to go to some very, very practical application. Because I believe John Maxwell is one of the great leadership experts of my generation. I have read many of his books, have a lot of them in my libraries. One of the things that he talks about is legacy in leadership. What that simply means is the passing of the baton from one generation to the next. That we're always concerned about how we can help develop other people. And I want to give us a couple of examples of that. Here's the way this law of legacy works. He gives 4 examples of this. He talks about achievement. I'm just going to read these, okay? He said achievement comes when someone is able to do great things for himself. Now, I just want us to think about this as we go through these. If someone does great things for himself, can that be a blessing in church? Go ahead and say yes. Okay. All right. But move to the next one. Success comes when he empowers followers to do great things with him. Good things happening in the church? Oh, I think so. Move to the next level. Significance comes when he develops leaders who do great things for him. Now these are the leaders that are doing things, and they're doing great things for other people. But man, catch this. Legacy comes when a leader raises others to do great things without him. One of the great tests of leadership, Maxwell says, is what takes place in the couple of years after the leader's gone. And that can come about for a number of reasons. It could be illness, it could be moving away, it could be retirement. There are a number of ways that this happens. But the big test is that, a couple of years and you get to find out how well trained and motivated those leaders were. It might be that somebody comes back, hadn't been here in a while, man, how are things going? Oh, they're not going too well. Man, you had such great leadership a couple of years ago. Brother so-and-so was in the pulpit. There were so many people that were working. It's just kind of fallen apart. We don't want that to happen, okay? We don't want that to happen. What we desire to see is relationships in the church where one brother in Christ helps another brother in Christ. Typically, it's an older training a younger. What we see also is in the family of where fathers are teaching their children, where mothers are teaching their children, but you have the older teaching the younger, older men teaching younger men, older women teaching younger women. You have in the family of where parents are teaching their children, but we're teaching them things in the church. So here's what I think, parents. As we go about and we're doing things in the church, it might be that you're working, Dad, on a Lord's Supper devotional. You've got a teenage boy in the house. You know what you need to do? When you're putting together that devotional, you need to have your son sit down with you. Go through that together. Let him understand why you're going to say the things you're going to say. Now, men of the church, we have an opportunity as well that you might want to talk to some of our young men and say, hey, I want to just tell you something. I'm going to be working on the Lord's Supper devotional for such and such date. Is there a way that we might get together up here at the building and let's work on one? And let's do this. Let's work on one for me and let's work on one for you. I still have notes. I still have notes from some of the first times that adults at our congregation where I grew up of where they helped me plan a devotional. You see, it can happen. And good things can happen as a result of that. One more story, and we'll be done for the night. I've said a lot. I hope that it has come together for you. But this is really important. All right. John Maxwell shares in his leadership podcast, Minute with Maxwell. He talks about the development of his passion for leadership. He starts off in his 20s. He said, when I was in my 20s, I wanted to make a difference. Now think about where we are today. How many of us want to make a difference? It doesn't have anything to do with age. It just has to do with, do you want to make a difference? And I think a lot of us do. He said, but I kept thinking about that. And I realized that there was room to grow. There was room to focus better. He said, so in his 30s, he said, I wanted to make a difference with people. That this wasn't just about me doing it, but I wanted to bring others along as well. I wanted to empower others as well. He said, but then I realized there was more. That in my 40s, I wanted to make a difference with people who wanted to make a difference. You see, everybody that we gather around us at times, some are going to have a passion for it and some don't. But we need to look and we need to find people that have a passion for, whether it's visitation, the hospital, the nursing home, maybe have a passion for being a leader in our pantry ministry, whatever the case may be. But we need to be training up leaders, all right? We need to find the people that want to make a difference. He said, but I wasn't done yet. He said, then I got to my 50s. He said, and that's when, I'm going to read this slow. He said, I want to make a difference with people who want to make a difference, doing something that makes a difference. Talking about passing the baton. Passing the baton takes a lot of practice. It is not something that happens overnight when we start talking about church. The passing of the baton, some of the stories that I've read, whether it's been about churches, whether it's been about businesses, but it's in wherever there are groups of people, that the best transitions take place when someone has been working. Think about Moses and Joshua. Joshua was with Moses for years, following him, learning from him. It's a growth process. So the fact that we take someone that is young and we bring them along with us now and they watch us and then we work together and then we watch them take off and they do great things on their own. That's wonderful, but that is not something that happens 1 Sunday, 2 Sundays, 3 Sundays. That's something that happens over a number of years. Church, if we want to have a generation that grows up and graduates from high school and remains faithful in the church, that we're going to make sure that we spend time of knowing how important it is that we train them to be effective workers and servants in the church, and that we let them know that hey, I need you to be ready because we're about to hand off that baton. And you need to be ready to take charge, whether that's teaching a Bible class, whether that's preaching a sermon, whether that's serving as a leader in a ministry. But always know, we've got to be preparing the next generation of leaders.